so that nothing I say you'll take just for, because I'm saying it, but you'll research it, you'll see the truth behind what I'm saying, and etc. So there are some major things that we're eating that we might think are healthy and are not so healthy for us. And there are some minor things. And I'm picking one of the minor things first, and that is that there are certain vegetables that are, they call nightshades, and that they grow by the sun, by the moon, not by the sun. They are noted in the Torah that there are vegetables that grow at night by the moon. The exact definition of the words to translate into current vegetables in English is not clear, so then we rely on science, because the common denominator in these vegetables, which I'll tell you in a minute, is a chemical called solanine. So they're called solinaceous vegetables. In Hebrew, Yirakot Solanai. And people from all over the world are familiar with this. And those 5 vegetables is tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, and peppers. Peppers like we call here gamba, or red bell peppers, red, green, yellow bell peppers. So if we look into history, we can find, for instance, that if you Google potato, a potato exists as human food for about 500 years. So since the human beings have been consuming food for some 5,700 years, only in the past short time have there existed as human food these vegetables. So they're called New Age vegetables. We know that, for instance, certain Hasidim will not use potato as the karpas, as the vegetable on the plate for the Pesach Passover plate, because of the question whether it's a shahakol bracha or a adama, whether it's a adama meaning a bracha, a blessing from growing in the ground. But you would think, what's that all about? Because a potato grows in the ground. But since the Mesorah, the tradition is that they know that their ancestors didn't have potatoes, so that's why there's a question about which blessing to make over it. And that's the same with potatoes and tomatoes. Many years ago, when I was in Kansas City, Missouri, getting my doctorate in chiropractic, I actually met a man named Dr. Childers, and he was an agriculturalist for the United States government. And when he was about my age, he developed some arthritis. So somebody said to him, don't eat nightshade vegetables. And he said, what are you talking about? I'm the expert here, you're telling me? So he didn't also take it with a grain of salt. He took a sabbatical and he went around the world for a year, and he wrote this book that he actually signed for me called Arthritis, Childers Diet to Stop It by Avoiding These Vegetables. So he writes in here, like for instance, the word for tomato in Old Italian is poison apple, or that cows, if they ate potatoes that were green, that were spoiling and green, could actually die from it. So in my estimation or my calculation, and in the way that I work in medicine, I figured that if this chemical solanine can cause inflammation in the joints or arthritis, then it's just not a good thing in general. It's a poison, and we don't want to have any poison in our body, not just because we want to suffer, we don't want to suffer from joint pain, but in general. So in my analysis and diagnosis of patients, I've been using applied kinesiology or muscle testing, which I started using over 40 years ago. And when I analyze a patient, I test them individually for different foods or vitamins or etc. So over 90% of the thousands of patients that I've checked in the past somewhat 40 years have been weakened or are not biologically okay with eating these foods. So it's not like I'm just reading a book and saying don't eat tomatoes, or some people might say you could have cooked tomatoes or you could have cherry tomatoes, which are not even real. They're all genetically manufactured. So the point is that in my own analysis, checking thousands of human beings, they are all weakened or not okay with eating these nightshade vegetables. So if you're eating a salad, like an Israeli salad, and you're including tomatoes and green peppers, etc., that's one area of which you might think you're eating healthy and you're really not. Also, just as an aside, I just remembered that tomatoes are very genetically modified. And I'm usually speaking from my knowledge in America more than in Israel, because that's where I was most of the time practicing. But you should know something interesting that you might find interesting, that there are genes or DNA of flounder fish in tomatoes. So you might think, why? Well, if a tomato crop, let's say in North Carolina, gets hit by a frost in March, let's say this sudden cold frost weather in March, and the tomato crop can be wiped out. So the farmers have to figure out how to make that tomato stronger and be able to resist a frost like that. So that's what they do in the laboratory. So they put DNA of flounder fish, which hang out on the bottom of the ocean where it's cold. And now that tomato might be able to resist a frost without shriveling up and dying, and the farmer won't lose his crop and a few $1,000s. So I thought that would be interesting for you. So just to review that point, so tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, and peppers, and paprika are all nightshade foods. And you can, again, Google this. You can check it out online. When you type in nightshades, there's 40 pages of information on that. And so if there's any controversy, whether you believe it or not, and you are listening to my expert advice, it's because I actually test people. Now, the next category I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go from the least likely to maybe the most harmful and the most ubiquitous in your diet. So there is a very high increase in the past number of years of the consumption of cheese in the Western world, like in America and in Israel. So cheese is an addictive food. And if you go online, like on YouTube, and you type in Dr. Neil Barnard, Barnard, like Barnard. Dr. Neil Barnard is a medical doctor, a very accomplished person, and there is a YouTube called The Cheese Trap, or just type in cheese at Dr. Neil Barnard, and you'll get the information scientifically what I'm telling you now. So cheese is an addictive food, as I said, and when people rate what foods are their most addictive, they will say things like ice cream or pizza, and it's because of the cheese. Now, in the past number of years, the amount of cheese that's consumed by each individual, basically, or the average American, is 34 pounds a year. And if you look at the cause of obesity in America, a lot of people are pointing out to sugar drinks like cola or soda pop. But since 1999, since about the 2000s, actual sugar consumption has been reducing in America because of the knowledge of the science of consumer knowledge, and people are buying bottled water more. So yes, sugar, we'll get to soon, is really an unhealthy part of our diet, and we should never be drinking soda pop, any kind of sugar drink like cola or so on. But on the other hand, the increase of cheese consumption has risen 300% since the year 2000, where sugar has been going down. So sugar is 70% fat. So even though we're thinking that carbohydrates, we'll talk about soon, are not so good for us and get stored as fat, but cheese is fat. And so contributing to obesity, heart disease, stroke, cholesterol, Alzheimer's, etc. All those things that we can talk about that carbohydrates do, cheese does work. So other factors of cheese is that it slows down our metabolism and it interferes with fat burning. So, just on a very simple way to look at it, cheese is mucus forming. It's fatty. It's full of. It is fat. So in my practice, since I've been working on a lot of children, I had a very nice pediatric practice in America. So when a patient comes in with asthma, which is now epidemic in America, it's the leading cause of child hospitalizations. So asthma, ear infections in children, that's caused by an excess of mucus. I had a book called The Mucusless Diet by Dr. Adhd, a medical doctor, written in the late 1860s, that mucus, excess mucus, was the cause of almost all disease. So on a simple level, dairy products and cheese particularly are excess mucus forming, which clog the body, clog the lungs, the bronchial tubes, and then the excess mucus goes into the ear canal, and then bacteria love to live in that very nice, warm, bushy mucus environment, and so then it becomes a place for infection. Excuse me a second. So milk products, and especially cheese, are one of those areas where if you think they're okay and you're eating healthy, it's not a good place to be. So I have a book here called A Guide for Dairy-Free, A Guide to a Dairy-Free Diet. And Dr. Brownstein, a medical doctor in Michigan, a very successful doctor, speaks not only about milk allergies, but also the fact that the milk has something called casein. It's a certain protein. So it's the protein found in milk and butter and yogurt and cheese. And it causes what's called leaky gut syndrome, where there's an intestinal disorder and an enzyme deficiency. So leaky gut is something that is much more ubiquitous, common in our generation. And we know that it's caused by other factors like gluten, which we'll talk about, but also by the casein, the protein in dairy. So undigested casein has an effect on the body similar to morphine. It affects our brain and the opioid receptors in our brain. So many symptoms of mood and brain function are caused by dairy, as well as the gastrointestinal disorder. So diarrhea, bloating, gasiness, constipation, asthma, autism, behavioral issues, headaches, chest pain, dry skin, hives, rash, stuffy nose, runny nose, sneezing. So that's all relative to dairy consumption. So now let's move to another area. When we talk about gluten, gluten is found in wheat, in grain products. The cells behind gluten are called gliadal cells. So particularly as a functional medicine doctor, I'm working on balancing hormones. And the pituitary gland is the master hormone found in our brains. And there's not that much to do to tweak or to affect the pituitary. But the next most important hormonal gland is the thyroid gland, which is found right here in our neck next to our vocal cords. Now, being in a high place of the body, it has a hierarchy and a very important function because it controls the metabolism, the energy of the body below it. So the thyroid hormones are very important. And interestingly enough, what the cells behind gluten are called gliadal cells. And for some reason, which I don't know, the gliadal cells mimic thyroid cells. So in the idea of autoimmune disease, Dr. Karzanian wrote a book, Why Do I Have Thyroid Symptoms When My Blood Tests, my lab tests are normal? The whole book and other books that I have in regard to thyroid function is regarding autoimmune disease. So also, which I'll discuss further in a little while, autoimmune disease has gone up in the past number of decades exponentially, including thyroiditis, which is a thyroid issue, and other autoimmune diseases like Crohn's and colitis and scleroderma, et cetera, arthritis. So there are definite reasons why these autoimmune diseases have skyrocketed in the past few years. But one of them is the idea that gluten is the culprit. And we'll find out in a minute what in our diets has so much more gluten in our age than ever before. But just to go back to the thyroid, when the body is detecting this excess gluten gliadal cells and attacks them, they're also attacking the thyroid gland, causing Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is the name for the autoimmune thyroid syndrome. So it's important for many reasons to know that gluten is something that's not so great for our bodies and could be calmed down as much as possible. Now, when we talk about calming down on gluten, it leads us to the idea particularly of that very important issue in many people, and I'm sure everybody listening themselves or has family members that might be aware of this. And that is the Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, diverticulitis, celiac disease, and so on. Now, many years ago, there's a woman named Elaine Gotcha wrote a book called Breaking the Vicious Cycle. Now, she became famous by connecting to medical doctors, holistic, alternative, integrative doctors around the United States. This book sold, I guess, 1 million copies or whatever, without any advertising by the publisher, only because people were getting the book, recommended this diet, which is called a carbohydrate-specific diet, and they were getting healed from very difficult chronic conditions. I know a young man who passed away that I grew up with in Brooklyn at 21 years old from Crohn's disease, and his sister was the chief of gastroenterology at a hospital in New York. So the medical mainstream does still not have a handle on these gastrointestinal disorders, even though we know what's going on in a large percentage of the cases. But since mainstream medicine, as Joyce said at the beginning of the program, are not into nutrition at all, they just don't know. So Breaking the Vicious Cycle says to stop eating flour products. And that's, of course, wheat and spelt and barley and a little bit oats, depending on which oats you're getting. But so the patients who go off these products, the inflammation in their body soon thereafter disappears. And there is some really excellent books like this one. This guy, Mr. Conrad Kendall, his daughter was diagnosed with this dangerous digestive problem, and her health was failing. And when they were recommended a specific carbohydrate diet, she completely got better, incredible results. So he wrote this really nice cookbook with 150 delicious specific carbohydrate diet recipes. And so it's not so hard. Steak and vegetables stir-fried. There's spinach, lemon, and basil pesto, different dyes, fish, etc. And it's very important to note. Now, when we're talking about excess carbohydrates, so I met and I knew Dr. Robert Atkins, excuse me. Dr. Atkins was a revolutionary medical doctor, a board-certified cardiologist, who many years ago, when I started my practice about 40 years ago, came up with the Atkins diet, which was low carbs or no carbs, specifically for the reversal of heart disease. So if a person was scheduled for a triple bypass surgery, and they went on the Atkins diet, which was ketogenic, then they could avoid surgery, and happened to thousands and thousands of patients. Now, ketogenic means zero carbs, which is healthy for a few months, not forever. But on the ketogenic diet, the body ate up its own fat, which is called ketosis. And so it reversed heart disease. Now, at the same time, there were other doctors who also purported vegetarianism, and that's in the same light as least that they were avoiding simple sugars. So everybody agreed at the time that simple sugar like soda pop and sugar and candies and cookies and etc. are no good for us, but specifically to reverse heart disease, Dr. Atkins was correct. Now today we call it, they call it syndrome X or metabolic syndrome. Almost all medicine acknowledges Dr. Atkins' work today, except pure vegetarians who are reluctant to eat animal products. But just by the way, a protein is an amino acids, and the same combination of amino acids can be found by eating a grain and a bean. So let's say brown rice and kidney beans have all the amino acids in it. A vegetarian might be lacking in B12 or etc. But I believe that we could and should eat meat, and depending on our blood type, which is another discussion for another time. But back to so low carbohydrate or eating the complex carbohydrates like quinoa or spelt or millet are okay. Millet or quinoa or brown rice are okay because they're complex carbohydrates and they don't go quickly in the bloodstream like a simple sugar, like a candy. So, we do know now that limiting our simple carbs are very important. So if you're eating too many carbs, then you might be in the category of this talk where you might be thinking you're eating okay, but you're not. Now, in one major area, which is what I'm going to talk about towards the end of the rest of this talk, is a specific area of carbs where a lot of patients, a lot of people out there would buy whole wheat bread, and they think they're eating well because they're buying and they're providing for their families whole wheat. So they're not getting the junky bleached white wheat, and they think they're doing great. Now, it happens to be that there are several books, and they were printed at the same time. One of them is called Brain Grain by Dr. Perlmutter, and he is a neurologist in Florida, still practicing, and he wrote a book about the same time that Dr. Davis wrote a book called Wheat Belly. Now, they didn't know they were both writing the book at the same time, but they both became New York Times bestsellers. And they're both telling us that 80% or more of the disease on the planet today, on our planet Earth, is caused by wheat. So that may be revolutionary for you to hear, unless you're familiar with what I'm saying. And I'll go into this a little further now. So there's not too much wheat left on our planet that looks like the wheat that God made in creation. So in the mid-1960s, the civilized world hybridized wheat. So it's also called modern wheat or dwarf wheat. The reason why it's called dwarf wheat is because a wheat plant, as Hashem, as God made it, or as your grandparents knew it, was a very tall plant. Let's say 3 meters or more, like 6 feet tall. Today in the world, if you look at a wheat field, it's only a short, like a half a meter, or I'm not good with meters, I'm good with feet. It's like 2 or 3 feet. It's half the size it used to be. So you might think, okay, big deal. So now the wheat is shorter. The reason they did that, of course, is economic, because you could get more wheat per dunam or per acre if you have this new seed. So they actually changed the wheat seed to create a new wheat called this modern wheat. So unless you have an original kernel of wheat in the jungle somewhere, or they're in an archaeological dig where they're trying to reestablish some old foods like wine and grapes and wheat, like they were prior to civil industrialization and genetic modification. So wheat today, it's not just that it's a smaller plant, but it has 50 times more gluten and agglutinins and phthalates. So the actual chemical composition of the wheat has changed drastically. And as we talked about earlier about gluten causing thyroid autoimmune disease, all autoimmune disease is created by wheat. And if you go on YouTube, or you want to buy the books, it's again Grain Brain by Dr. Perlmutter, or Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis, and research what I'm telling you as a fact of the matter. So what do I mean by all disease on the planet? Certainly heart disease and stroke, increased cholesterol and the bad cholesterol, digestive disorders, respiratory disorders like asthma, brain disorders like Alzheimer's are all implicated by the new wheat. So an alternative, of course, is still ancient spelt, kusmin in Hebrew. And don't forget, though, that kusmin spelt does have gluten. So if I do a muscle test, or you do a gluten sensitivity blood test, and you're sensitive or celiac to gluten, then spelt is not an alternative, but is just as far as people who have no particular heavy sensitivity to gluten. You should know that, let's say on Shabbat, you could eat spelt challah, and we buy spelt sourdough, which is now available even on all the bakeries. For the children, there's spelt pretzels or spelt gers, etc. So spelt is a very good alternative to wheat, but I'm saying pretty clearly that we should not have any wheat in our diet at all. Now, there are lots of hidden wheats, like a very junky food for children is licorice, the licorice Twizzlers, but it has a lot of wheat in it, which I didn't know until I read the book. All kinds of things, and you have to look. because wheat is in a lot of places besides bread and crackers and cookies. So those are the main things that I thought of to say of what you might be eating that is not so good for you. Now, needless to say, sugar is the number one. There are alternatives to sugar, like xylitol, which is very, very popular in Europe. They even make xylitol nose sprays and xylitol gum, which reduces asthma and ear infections in children. We all heard of stevia, which comes from a plant from South America. But just to think about this, our great-grandparents in Europe did not have candy. They had something called rock candy, which was pure crystallized sugar. But it was expensive. It wasn't around, like not everybody had sugar. So in the 1920s, when they first invented Coca-Cola and soda pop, the average American, westernized human being had about 20 pounds of sugar a year. In the last reading, which I think was 2013, the average American had 140 pounds of sugar a year. So diabetes is epidemic in America, and there are something like 1.9 million new cases of diabetes diagnosed in America every year. And that also is in children, where when I was younger in school, there was type 1 and type 2 diabetes, where type 1 was something inherent, like a breakdown of the pancreas. It was something that they called juvenile diabetes or type 1, where type 2 was something that happened later in life, like from eating too much junk. Today, many children have type 2 diabetes. It's not the juvenile diabetes that might even be an autoimmune disease, but it's just from the consumption of too much sugar. So to recap, milk has sugar because of the lactose. All dairy products have sugar. Some people are eating yogurts thinking they're healthy because they have some good bacteria. It's not that good bacteria anyway. It's not like making your own homemade yogurt. And in a non-fat container of regular yogurt, there are some 2 or 3 or 4 teaspoons of sugar just because of the lactose in inherent content. So to review some of the things we said, so dairy products are not healthy for us. Cheese particularly is extremely not healthy. Cheese also, by the way, if we look at economics and we follow the money trail, in America, when women get WIC stamps or Medicaid, the government is giving them free cheese and free milk. You can't go to a grocery with WIC stamps and get sweet potatoes and carrots. So there's a connection between the government and things that are not healthy, and be aware of that. And I'm a little bit maybe cynical and skeptical, being that's my business in holistic health, but keep that in mind. So dairy products are full of fat and full of sugar. A lot of carbohydrates and gluten are causing lots of issues in our bodies, unhealthy issues. Particularly stay away from wheat altogether. Let's see, what else did I talk about? And the nightshade vegetables, which cause inflammation in our body. So that really recaps everything I wanted to say today. And again, somebody said something about eggs. Okay, so now.
What about honey?
Wait, slow down.
1 minute. We will do
one at a time.
Better?
Okay, I'll address one question at a time. I
Is
also
honey
see.
any better than sugar?
Wait, I'm going to say that one second.
YouTube.
I also see on. I'm gonna answer the questions. I see on my phone that my battery is low. I hope I don't run out, because I'm not going to get up from my seat to get my charger. So I should be able to make it. If I disappear, I apologize. So now let's go honey. Honey, there are 2 kinds of honey in the world. There's raw honey from the beehive, and that has many minerals and good stuff, like bee propolis, which is the queen bee food, for the special made food for the bee, for the queen bee, is one of the most incredible foods on the planet, on the face of the earth. But all honey has a lot of juice to it. So if a person is not diabetic or yeast infection or a fungus infection, quality is very good. Regular supermarket, it's been filtered and cooked. It becomes like sugar. So honey could be good, not good. Only organic, and eggs I feel are very healthy food. It's an excellent protein, no fat, something called inositol and choline, which is the opposite of cholesterol actually, and also from the standpoint of brain function, inositol and choline are very good for. So I think eggs are an excellent food. Unfortunately, regular eggs are laid from unhealthy chickens, and in this country it's better than in America. But chickens don't get to move around; they're force fed. It's not a very healthy chicken. The chickens are in a huge steel building. There are like 400,000 in one room. The lights are on 24 hours, and they make 2 eggs instead of 1. 1 year, they have tumorous cancer cells.
You're breaking up.
Oh, okay, I'll try to do better. I'm gonna take a drink. So eggs are healthy, especially organic.
Dr. Beck,
How's that better?
How about goat cheese?
Oh, good question. All goat products and the goat protein much more mimic our human cells' needs. So if we look in the Torah, in Parshas Bo and Shmot, Rashi says chalav izim. When it says Eretz Zavat chalav udvash, Rashi tells us on the spot chalav izim. They didn't really have cows in the old days, and so goat products are healthy and much more tolerated and recognized by our cells. And so yes, no cow, yes goat.
Dr. Beck, we have a couple of questions on the chat.
Okay.
What good and bad foods for kids with ADHD?
So again, if you look at the books that I recommended on wheat, like Brain Grain by a neurologist, that's very much implicating modern wheat in causing ADHD and ADD. It messes up the brain. Of course, any kind of sugar is not good, but Dr. Feingold, a pediatrician from San Francisco, who wrote the first books, the very first book written about hyperactivity in children before they called it ADHD was written by Dr. Feingold. And he noted that more than the sugar in the foods that the kids are eating are the artificial colorings. So if something that you eat is red or yellow or blue, like these different candies that the kids are eating, or God forbid slush, which is one of the most unbelievable, unhealthiest things. You see the kids are lined up outside the store to buy slush, which is just sugar and food coloring. So it's just awful. It just destroys the brain. So sugar, artificial colorings, and wheat, and as I mentioned, cheese, are messing up the brains.
Dr. Beck, we have another question on the chat. What if we have no arthritis? I suppose they mean if they can have nightshades.
Yeah, so I mentioned that in my talk that even though, so in my rational brain, I said to myself, okay, if it makes arthritis in older people, it can't be good in other ways for any age person, even a 5-year-old child, because a poison is a poison. It happened to be that it manifests in joint inflammation, but it causes inflammation in the lungs, in the brain, in the heart. So if I do muscle testing and I test any age person and they're weakened by nightshades, in my very pashut, simple brain, it says, it's a poison, don't eat it, even if you don't have arthritis.
Okay, I have a question here from Rivka. What with migraine sufferer?
So every individual has an individual biochemistry. So I can't answer that question individually, but as a general question, migraine headaches can be caused by different foods like chocolate and smoked foods, like in a Brit Milah in the morning, there's like smoked fish type of thing. So that we know for sure creates a chemical imbalance that causes migraines. But it's a general answer to more of a specific question. So, but definitely what the medical mainstream world is not copying is that migraines could definitely be a food-related syndrome.
Okay, one more question. What about fruits? Any specifics to avoid?
Okay, so fruits, again, let's say strawberries. Strawberries are a wonderful, delicious fruit, but they're the most highly sprayed with pesticides and herbicides that I think I know of. So if we're eating a bunch of strawberries, we put strawberries in our smoothie or in our shake, we're getting a concentration of chemicals which are not so good for us. So when you look at fruit today, it's again an acknowledgement or a thought process.
Oh dear. I think we've lost Dr. Beck. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, I think so too.
His battery is gone.
Okay, well, I had a question for him, but I will put it on the group. And my question was, if we cannot do all of these, what are the 3 best things he would advise us to do?
Well, that's great.
That's a good question, because I can't
You ask
imagine
him
affording
privately and
this
let
on
us
my
know.
salary.
One at a time, please. One at a time. Mute yourself and unmute yourself if you want to talk. We'll put it on the. I will ask him that and put it on the group, and I will also put his number if anybody wants to see him. Contact him yourself privately.
Joyce, this is Jeanette. A question about chocolates. Is there any healthy chocolates that one can eat? I'm talking not necessarily about dairy, but like powdered.
I think he will say the one without sugar.
Okay.
You know, dark chocolate 70%. I think that's what he would say. That's what he's told me in the past.
Okay.
Just wanted to say thank you to everybody from all over, from South Africa.
By the way, Joyce, there is also a chocolate 88%. Excellent, delicious.
Great.
Name.
And thank you, Joyce.
Pleasure. Okay, next week, Mitzvah Shem, we have Dr. Rabbi Kiva Tatz. So I will post it next and look forward to seeing you all here again. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Joyce. It was great. It's great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
One thing we are having.
Thank you.
1 second, we are just having a little technical challenge with this WhatsApp group that I cannot be the administrator. I'm trying to rectify that. So please bear with me. I'm going to start another group and transfer the names where I can be the administrator. Leave that one for a chat should anybody want it. Post chats on there or any requests that you have. So if you don't want to be on the chat, that's not a problem. When I've established the new group, I'll transfer the names. So I'm sorry if you're getting messages that you really don't want at the moment, but we are working on it. So thank you so much and look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
This guy was all the way from America?
No, he's American.